Hello, Dr. Geikis. It's Abigail Edwards from your BBH 411 class. My project is on the restrictions on physician's assistant in modern medicine, with a focus on the restrictions of them not being able to own their own practice. I'm basically going to start with explaining what a PA is, and I'm going to explain who are most common to be PAs and how they're different from a nurse practitioner or a doctor. Just a preliminary explanation to introduce the paper and to basically introduce the topic. And then I'm going to explain how a physician came to be. I'm going to talk about the background information of where they got started, how they stemmed from medical school, and I'm going to go into more of the educational components and how PA school is different from NP school or different from nursing school or different from medical school and stuff like that, and get more into the specifics of what is actually required to become a PA versus a nurse practitioner. One really cool fact that I found that I thought was really, really interesting is the fact that PA's based school is based on a medical model. So this medical model is basically a branch off of medical school, meaning that PAs are more closely related to doctors, whereas NPs are more closely related to nurses. This makes a lot of sense when you think about it. However, it's just even more puzzling as to why PAs are not allowed the same responsibilities as NPs. So that's one of the things I'm really going to get into. And that basically leads into my question of why. My question of why, which is the main theme for this paper, is why can nurse practitioners open their own practice and a physician's assistant can't? So I think this topic is very relevant, not only for me, I'm a little bit biased because I'm going to PA school. However, I think it's relevant because PA is such an upcoming field. It is growing so quickly. The application pools every year are just increasing in size exponentially, and it's becoming more and more popular. One of the papers that I found from the American Academy of PAs basically goes on to say how trusted physician's assistants are and how people are starting to trust them just as much as they would trust a normal doctor. This just means that they're going to become more and more popular. They are going to become just more and more of us are going to start going into PA because number one, the schooling is shorter and you still are allowed a lot of the same responsibilities. The pay is also cut, so that isn't necessarily good for the individual. However, that means that they're going to be hired more because they're not as expensive to pay. So these are just some of the things that I read from these papers and from another qualitative study that I found from PubMed. And so they're just up and coming so quickly that because of that, I really think that as we trust them more and more and employ them more and more, we should also be increasing their responsibilities and their professional freedom. And that means owning a practice. That means being able to run a practice without a physician overshadowing you, without a physician having to double check every move you make. Whereas NPs have that freedom. So I'm interested as to why PAs don't have that. And I think that's very relevant in today's society. So the scope of my paper basically starts from the very beginning of when PA branched off of doctor, where they started up until the current time. So I'm going to start with the history of PAs and basically go over a timeline of their evolution. And then I'm going to go over the education requirements for a doctor, an NP, and a PA and how they're different. I'm going to go over the style of patient care of a PA versus a nurse practitioner and how this affects patients and if it really is as different as it sounds. I'm going to go over some of the myths and misconceptions that people have of PAs, that they're not as qualified, that they don't want to see them as much. I'm going to go over some of that and how that's affecting PAs in their practice. And then I'm going to go over the limitations of PAs versus nurse practitioners and specifically get into the nitty-gritty of why they can't own a practice. And then I'm going to lead into my conclusion of any future changes that any scholars are predicting, or if there's any foreseeable changes in the future. My rationale for this paper is to understand the legislation that's already in place. We really have to understand what a PA is and how nurse practitioners got that responsibility, but PAs didn't. So I'm going to go back and look at the history and look at basically the legal side of all of this and how these decisions were made, who they were made by. I'm going to look on the countrywide government level, I'm going to look on the statewide government level, just kind of everything and try to get into it as much as I can to figure out exactly why this is the way it is. Um, and then, so for my strategy was really, it was basically just based off my own curiosity. Since this is my future career and this is something that is going to affect my job for the rest of my life, I was really curious and I had a lot of questions on what are my responsibilities going to be and what am I going to be allowed to do? Where is the line that I can't cross because I'm not a doctor? And so I knew a very superficial amount of this going into when I decided I wanted to become a PA. However, I don't know as much as I feel like I should. So, with that said, with this paper, I really want to focus on the state of North Carolina. That is where I'm going to be attending PA school. That is where I'm going to be practicing after I graduate, and that is where I live now. So, that said, I would like to focus on something that is going to be most relevant in my future career, and that would be the legislation in North Carolina, because those are the limitations I'm going to have to follow. So, with my strategy, I basically just started with where I was most curious, and that was the practice, the fact that I won't be able to own my own practice going into the future. And I wanted to know why that was. I wanted to know why me as a PA, I'm not going to be able to do something that I could do as an NP. And so that is my strategy for figuring this out. And then here are my references. Thank you very much.